Hey guys, it's Ayianna and welcome back to Community Spotlight. Today I have here with me Veera Hiranandani, and we are going to be talking about her book called The Night Diary. I'm just going to be interviewing her and asking her a couple questions. So, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure, and thank you for having me here today. So my book, The Night Diary, is about a 12-year-old girl who has to leave her home during the partition of India in 1947. And it was inspired by some of my father's experiences. He also had to leave his home during that time when India split into India and Pakistan. At the same time, it gained independence from British rule. So he was 9 when he had to leave his home. And he left with his family, and they left a place that they had lived for many, many years and had to flee their home and become refugees and find a new place over the new border.
Okay, so your father inspired the book. That's interesting. I like that. What inspired you to become an author?
Well, I always liked to write. So when I was younger, I would write just, poems and plays and stories. And it was really just my way of kind of playing and figuring out the world. And also, I really just like to make things. Whenever I made something when I was younger, because when you're younger, you feel like, the adults are all in charge and you don't always have the control you want. So I think it gave me a certain kind of control that I enjoyed, and then I just kept writing. So when I became an adult, I started to realize, you can be an author. You can do this as a job.
Okay. I also am aware that you teach, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've taught in different ways at different times, but I've taught writing for many years. And I really love teaching and creative writing. And I've taught people your age all the way up to, from age 10 to 90, basically. Maybe not quite 90. But I love teaching writing to people of all ages because it really helps me sort of remember what I'm trying to do with my craft and all my ideas when I'm teaching somebody else. So I always learn when I'm teaching, so it kind of keeps me on my toes.
Okay. When exactly did you write this book?
I wrote this book, I started writing it now it's about 6 years. I've been saying 5 years as I've been talking about the book, but I realize a year has gone by because the book came out last March. So it's a little over a year. So I started writing it about 6 years ago and revised it for many years, and then publishing is really slow. So when you sell something, it's usually you sell a manuscript and then it doesn't get published until like 2 years after that. So It takes a while.
Okay. Now these quotes, what are the quotes on the back about?
So when you publish a book, you want to try to get blurbs from other writers that people know or admire or connected to the kinds of things you're writing. So you think of all the people you know, your publisher thinks of authors they know, and then you just send the book out to authors and ask them if they'll read your book and give you what's called a blurb. Okay. And so those were the blurbs that I got, that I was very honored to get them from the authors who read the book and liked it.
You talked a little bit about the process of the book, so could you tell me about the process of the first time you thought about it to the end of the book?
Sure. It's such a kind of complicated, windy process. So I had grown up hearing about the partition of India and how people had to leave their homes when India was split apart, and there were religious conflicts in India. And so what happened was non-Muslims and Hindus went one way and Muslims went the other way into Pakistan, and about 7 million people were displaced on one side of India and about 7 million people were displaced on the other side. And there was also a lot of conflict and fighting. It was a really difficult, scary time, and 1 to 2 million people died during this piece of history in 1947. So my father was part of that history, so I knew I was connected to this piece of history. And at the same time, I grew up here. I grew up in Connecticut, and nobody around me had ever heard of the partition of India. I didn't really learn about it in school, and so I had more questions. I wanted to learn more about it. So I think the idea sort of was there since I was very young, but I didn't know I'd grow up to be an author. And I was also nervous about taking on such a big piece of history. Like, how would I write a novel about that? And who would my main character be? And how close would it follow my father's family? And so I kept thinking of those things, and I wrote some other books in the meantime. And then when I became a more experienced writer, I thought, okay, I think I might be ready to tell this story. I feel like I need to tell this story. And I started just thinking about the main character and what her story would be, what her journey would be. And I started to think about my father's family's history, but then all the history I read about. I wanted to sort of combine pieces into her story. So I started to just kind of weave together some of the history I was learning, and created one character that would write in a diary and tell this story. And then I just kind of followed that thread until the finished book.
Okay, I think that's great. I think that, like you said, that, they don't teach you all the history in school, and I think that it's great that you came out and you wrote this book, so now people will know. So I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm Ayianna from Community Spotlight, and thank you, Veera, for coming here. It was a pleasure having you here, and thank you for telling us about your book. So yes, I'm Ayianna from Community Spotlight, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
What?